From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on keeping your focus at your next work presentation while your supervisor suggestively eats a banana. And now, the podcast host who has no need for such things because he saves any and all innuendo for his favorite restaurants, Pete Dominic!
Thank you very much, Pico, for another amazing, accurate, on-target introduction, and thank you for all that you do for me. I'll come back to Pico in just a minute. Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode where I have an awesome conversation with finance expert Barry Ritholtz joining me on the program today. That is coming up at about 31 minutes. And after my conversation with Barry Ritholtz, I have a preview, an excerpt from the latest Pops on Hops episode with another Barry, Dr. Barry Hummel, and his daughter Abigail, co-host Pops on Hops. Barry, of course, a valued listener and friend of mine who contributes a lot to this show in our community. His show is an album review, music album review podcast where he and his daughter listen to some songs and music, drink a little hops, beer, and they get to hang out with each other, and they have special guests. Another listener and valued member of our community, Francis Walton, France Pants, is their guest, and I've got a little excerpt, a little preview from that after my conversation with Ritholtz. Okay, so let's get started. It's Thursday, the 11th of May. That means I will be hosting a hangout tonight at 8 p.m. East, just after my appearance on Australia's Today Show to talk about the train wreck that was CNN's in-kind donation to Trump 2024. You could see it that way. You could also, if you wanted to interpret it, that last night's town hall with former disgraced President Donald Trump was a long, terrible advertisement for him in terms of the voters that he needs to be able to win over to be reelected. Different ways to look at it. I'll give you a lot more reaction to that in a moment. The Trump town hall wasn't the only thing that happened yesterday. A few other news stories I want to mention. And then I've got something really important and very personal to share with you. But let's start with this. Representative George Santos, Republican from Long Island, Queens, has been charged with fraud. He is pleading not guilty. He was released on a $500,000 bond, faces up to 20 years in prison, and had a bizarre press conference yesterday saying he will not resign, and he is going to continue to run for re-election. I don't know who his supporters are. I mean, honestly, where are they? Who would possibly support the guy? But that's a thing that happened yesterday. Also, inflation slowed. Again, the rise in U.S. consumer prices slowed for 10th straight month in April. Good news for all of us, I think it's fair to say. A panel of health experts said that the benefits of making a birth control pill available without a prescription outweigh the risks. That's right. The FDA advisors have favored an over-the-counter birth control pill called Opal. And OPILL, it will be available, could be available this summer, significantly expand access to contraception. And the war in Europe continues, where Ukrainian commanders said that their troops had broken through Russian positions in Bakhmut, taking back roughly 3 square miles of the embattled eastern city, when a lot of people had predicted they would lose that city, and they still might. But that's an interesting development there. Missouri lawmakers passed a bill to ban transition care for transgender youth. A Texas man convicted of killing a Black Lives Matter protester was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And Governor Greg Abbott says he wants to pardon the man because, you know, old boys got to stick together. Look forward to talking to Ty Randolph tonight about who will be branded in that situation. I think it's going to be everybody. And a pancreatic cancer vaccine has showed promise in a new small trial, so I think that's pretty good news. But, of course, the big story last night is that less than 24 hours, I think, after President Trump was found guilty yet again, this time in defamation and sexual abuse, if I have that right, of Jon Carroll. I'm not sure exactly of the charges. But, I mean, less than a day after that, he's in New Hampshire at St. Anselm College, where I actually broadcasted from when I was at Sirius XM for one of the debates, I think. I was there when I was also at CNN myself. Anyway, it's a beautiful campus. And I guess there were a few college students in the crowd. But did you see that crowd last night for the CNN town hall with Donald Trump? I mean, it was almost purely white. It looked like a blizzard in the room. To be fair, it's New Hampshire. There's like 9 people there, and they're mostly white. And the questions came from entirely supporters. Could make the argument it's a Republican primary, and that's how those things should be booked, but it's not an argument that I would make. The announcement that CNN was going to host the New Hampshire town hall event for Donald Trump was obviously met with a tremendous amount of criticism, as you know. A little bit of that from Media Matters' Angela Carusone, who I think is a tough dude, progressive watchdog group, of course. He said the transparent attempt to goose their ratings does feel a little odious, but all the more reason they need to get this right. Judd Legum, author of Popular Info and regular guest here on the show, where he's been on a few times, he wrote, first, CNN systematically purged anyone on the network who was deemed too anti-Trump. Now this. He also tweeted, the audience for the CNN town hall with Trump will be 400 Republicans and GOP-leaning independents. Allowing Trump to appear in front of an audience exclusively compromises the people who are likely sympathetic to Trump and then turn over the questions to that group is irresponsible. That's what Judd said. Keith Olbermann says, I think we can say Chris Licht's conversion of CNN into a political journalistic whorehouse is complete. Chris Licht, of course, who took over for Jeff Zucker as CNN's chief executive last year. And now let's get to some of the reactions to CNN's town hall during and after. First, our own Bill B in D.C., Bill Boyle, had several tweets that were quite popular, including this one. He wrote, CNN wants it to be very clear that despite the fact that the audience for tonight's town hall was chosen only from among Republicans and undecideds, there will be a very broad range of questions asked of the recently indicted sex offender candidate, and then included an AI-generated image of a cartoon orange Trump surrounded by minions who all look the same, the minions from the animated film. And then Bill coined the term boot-licked. So Chris Licht, boot-licked, got it. And quoting a tweet from someone else who wrote, CNN's town hall audience cheers when Trump brings up his first impeachment. Bill wrote, the term for this is bootlicked. And here is a little audio from Jake Tapper on CNN recapping the whole thing. Bill says about this, by the way, if you're at Jake Tapper and you don't mention the fact that Trump's torrent of bullshit was on CNN, then hashtag bootlicked. It's like branded, but it's Bill's version. Here it is. Jake Tapper summing it up.
From Washington, and it was an interesting night. Mr. Trump's first lie was told just seconds into the night with his false familiar claim that the 2020 election was, quote, a rigged election. And the falsehoods kept coming fast and furious about the January 6th insurrection, about the threat to Vice President Pence, about Pence's ability to overturn the election, about COVID, about the economy and more. He called a black law enforcement officer a thug. He said people here in Washington, D.C. at Chinatown don't speak English. He attacked Caitlyn as a nasty woman because she was trying to get him to answer a question. Perhaps most chillingly, the day after a 9-person jury of his peers in New York found him liable for sexual battery and defamation and ordered him to pay writer E. Jean Carroll $5 million, he made fun of her account of her sexual assault. And many in the audience laughed.
All right, well, that's Jake Tapper's summary. Of course, the fact that was on CNN is the big elephant on the air in the room. Just a couple more reactions, and then I'll wrap this up. But I love being able to aggregate stuff for you and share it across a wide range. Here's Michael Cohen, our friend Michael Cohen. He writes, Trump looks and sounds awful. This is a dumpster fire for him. And so he had some criticism of CNN. I'll talk with Michael about it. And the similar criticism about the people who are asking the questions, of course. But he doubled down on his analysis that this is bad for Trump. MSNBC's Mehdi Hassan. CNN put their own reporter, Caitlin Collins, in a room full of Trump fans, and now they're consistently laughing at his jokes and clapping at his attack lines, including on her. Madness. Our friend Wajad Ali. This is a mess. The audience relishes in Trump's cruelty. Look at how they laughed at E. Jean Carroll in her story. But ratings, baby. Ratings. He used to work and get paid for by CNN, by the way. So love that from Waj. Palmer Report. This isn't a town hall. It's a Trump Klan rally. Christopher Webb, the fact that CNN decided to give Trump, the sexual predator, an uninterrupted platform after the way he dragged them for filth for years tells you all you need to know about what's happened to that network. Train wreck! So, I don't know. The analysis is Donald Trump is the front runner for the Republican nomination by a long shot. He's also a huge criminal who, while president, led an insurrection, then didn't try to stop it. So, if you're a major news network, do you have that guy on or not? Journalists, historians, and a lot of other smart people weighing in on this. I look forward to hearing what you think. Emotionally, you say, of course not. But if you try to be as objective of a journalist as you can, you say, well, he's the front runner. It's not like he's this radical extremist that we're giving a platform to and making him more popular, because that's what CNN and many of the major news networks did the first time around, you might argue. But I don't know. My only opinion is this. Donald Trump has said horrific things for years. Before he was president, after he became president, he's also done horrific things. So he committed crimes before he was president and while he was president. And if we're being honest, which is a stupid phrase, but a way to say this might hurt to hear, if we're being honest, a lot of Americans like and agree with what he had to say and what he did to us and the crimes that he committed. They're okay with them. They look the other way or support them. Like almost the most voters that ever voted in an election like them. And that's after he was president for 4 years. So if we're giving him a platform, if we're putting him on air, what more are we doing? We saw him on the world stage, literally. Is there an actual world stage? I don't want to use the word literally wrong. Is there a stage somewhere that's called the world stage? I think that would be the only way that'd be accurate. But you know what I mean? We watched him. He was the president. So I think pretty much folks have their minds made up. Is anybody out there going, you know what? Trump really won me over at that CNN town hall. I wasn't sure about him. Of course not. So my opinion, and I may be wrong, and I look forward to hearing yours and you telling me that I am wrong, is that it did him more damage than it did good. That appearance. She gave him the rope to hang himself with, and he dangled there, might be another way of saying it, because that image isn't upsetting. Fortunately or unfortunately. I mean, it could be upsetting to some people, or it could be awesome. Fortunately or unfortunately. So that's all I have to say about that. Is there any other news? Now, I mentioned quite a bit, right? Let's see. Ron DeSantis, Florida education officials rejected dozens of social studies textbooks and fixed dozens of other books to prevent political indoctrination of our children. Fixes in quotes. Joe Manchin threatened to vote against all Biden's EPA nominees unless the administration rescinds new carbon emission standards for power plants. Oh, boy. Okay, thank you, Joe Manchin. All right, that's it. That is all of the news recap I've got for you. Now it's time to tell you a personal story and lesson from my life that all of you can hopefully benefit from. I'm going to share with you something that happened to my daughter that was really, really bad, and then just talk a little bit about it. But I want you to understand the reason I'm sharing this isn't for sympathy or advice or money, and you'll see why I'm saying that, but so that maybe it won't happen to you or your loved one or family member. And also, while this crime that was committed against my daughter was a horrible group of people who did a horrible thing, a much better, much larger group of people did a generous and heartwarming thing. And many of you are actually listening right now because you're listeners and subscribers and supporters and friends and practically family to me at this point. So it actually has a happy ending, and it's a public service announcement so that you and your loved one don't have this happen to them. All right, here it is. Here's what happened. Yesterday, or Tuesday, I'm talking late on Wednesday night, Ava, 18, was sitting in the parking lot eating her lunch at her school. She takes that hour and she goes out and studies and sits in her car. She's a senior in high school, off to Ithaca College in the fall. Very excited for her. Straight A student, great SAT scores, National Honor Society, scholarship to college, has to be adopted or from another man. Smart kid, did a whole lot better by all of those metrics than I did. She gets a phone call. It's a scammer, a team of criminals. 3 hours later, she had given that scammer $5,000 or all of the money in her bank account. He convinced her to empty her bank account as a way to protect her money and her identity, and he was successful. Or I should say they, because these scammers are running a whole operation. There are several people at once working on the mark, who yesterday was unfortunately my daughter, Ava. Put a different way, Ava has had a job since COVID ended. She has saved up $5,000 to go off to college with which is pretty impressive, at least from my perspective. I don't think I had any money when I went off to college. I don't have a pot to piss in. I actually worked at the on-campus burger joint for like $5 an hour. But not our Ava. She has worked several different jobs, including being a lead camp counselor at this amazing camp in Lake George, New York, where she's actually going back this summer with her best friend, her little sister, Julia, 3 years younger, and they will spend their last summer together for a month in this beautiful place. We're lucky. We're fortunate. But Ava has worked very hard to put herself in this position. She knows the value of money. She's been completely responsible with the money. If anything, stingy. She gets a little crazy about her bank account going under a certain number wherever it's at. So she's been saving. She's been earning and working and saving. And yesterday, someone took all of her money. They convinced her to take the money out of her account, or else it was going to be taken, and put it in another account. It is a long, confusing, hard to believe that someone would follow along with this plot. But that's why it's so important that I talk about it and that Ava talks about it. And we're going to do a whole PSA about this and continue to discuss it to make sure it doesn't happen to other people. And at the Hangout tonight, we'll get in more details. And then Ava's going to join me on the podcast to go through what happened. So I'm sure you have all kinds of questions, just as we did. But the point is, they kept her on the phone for 3 hours until she deposited the money into a Bitcoin bank, which I didn't know existed, and now it's gone. And they are ghosts, and there is nothing you can do. In the show notes, I'll link to the kind of plot it was if you want to know more about it, because this is not an uncommon plot. It's obviously not always ever exactly the same, but they pose as agents of law enforcement, and they tell you that if you don't get your money out of your account, it's going to disappear. They pretend to protect you. They say your identity has been stolen and someone committed a crime with your identity, and you will be held responsible for that crime if you don't follow these instructions. Many people would hang up right there. Many people do not. And for those who don't, for any reason, it is not your fault, first and foremost. And for me, personally, the hardest thing about this is I believe it's my fault. I believe I missed something. And no one can try to convince me otherwise. And it doesn't matter if you want to try. What matters is I wish I knew this. Tell your kids, tell yourself, your parents, and your loved ones right now. Share my story. It'll be documented in social media. Share this podcast. Tell them what happened. Here's the bottom line. Law enforcement will never call you and demand money. Ask for money. Number one. And number two, you don't have to talk to them. You always get a phone call. You always get a lawyer. But again, one more time, if you drill one sentence into your kids, into your elderly parents, or anybody else that's vulnerable to being a mark for this type of crime, and by the way, there are some really smart people who fall for these kinds of things, and I've heard from many of you over the last 24 hours, is this. Nobody from any law enforcement agency, the local police department and sheriff, the FBI, customs, they pretend to be all of them. They connect you with others. And while this didn't happen to my daughter, since I've been researching this for under a day, they're now using the voices of your loved ones and playing those voices to convince you that your loved one has basically been arrested. And if you don't give them money, that's one of these schemes that is happening. And a quick solution to that one is to get together with your family and your loved ones and have a safe word. If someone calls you and says, we've arrested your son or your husband or your brother, and if you don't give us money, we won't let him out, you simply say, okay, if that's the case, tell him to tell you our safe word. And by the way, I suggested and got shut down when we talked about this in my family that it should be taint, and nobody thought that was funny, and nobody went for it. So we settle on something else. But this has been a plot and a crime that has mostly targeted older folks. And criminals will always be ahead of authorities because that's the nature of humanity. We don't know what crimes they're going to commit. It's very hard to prevent them before they make up these crimes when they get creative. And of course, they've been targeting elderly people because they don't always understand technology and they're easier marks, if you will, and they have money. But one thing that we as parents haven't thought about is having to tell our kids about this, because we can tell our kids about all the dangers that are likely to be in or even unlikely to be in. You don't want to scare them. It's a tough balance. But you don't think about your kids being targeted for this because your kids don't have any money until they do. So the appropriate time to warn your kids about this is not to scare them, because they don't need to necessarily know this type of thing until they have money, is when they accrue a significant amount of money, as Ava did. So at tonight's hangout, Ava will be there, and we'll do like a fun press conference, and we'll answer all of the questions that you already have probably several of. But when Ava came home, we couldn't get a hold of her, and we needed the car. And finally, she pulls in and tells us that she's on the phone with the police, and that they're telling her that she has to make a deposit or she's going to be arrested. I snatched the phone from her hand. I said, "Hello? Who is this?" And they hung up. That was it. And scene. They got the money. You might be asking, why were they still on the phone with her after they got the money? Well, they were trying to get more. They then told her, "We have $10,000. You owe $10,000 in back taxes. Can you get that right now?" And she said, "I don't have any more money. I'll ask my parents." That's why she was still on the phone with them. This poor girl. These terrible people. And she told us that they told her if she texts anyone, they will know it and she will lose the money. They had her locked up. They had her locked in fear for 3 hours. She knew the money was gone. She gave it all away to them, to these criminals. There we were in front of the house, me, Val, Ava, and her sister Julia now. And she fell to her knees, crumpled in a ball on her front walk, and cried, and hyperventilated. And we cried. We couldn't believe that this had happened to our girl, and to us, really. We were victims of a crime. She is a victim of a crime. She was traumatized. She was digging her nails into herself. She was so mad at herself. She was so humiliated and embarrassed that she had been used this way, that they took all of her hard-earned money in an instant, or 3 hours, really. It was horrible, as you can imagine. I talked about it on social media and left the comments off because I didn't want advice. I didn't want people to make comments about Ava, criticizing her. And I don't seek out people's pity or sympathy. It makes me feel badly about myself. And I kind of feel the same way about talking about it here on the podcast. I'm telling you this so that you have the knowledge to prevent it from happening to you. Because maybe, unlike me, you don't have an amazing, huge community of people that will come to your aid and save you. Start a GoFundMe for you or your loved one, because that's also what happened. I shared this with my friend Pete Coe, who you know from the opening announcement on the show almost every day for years. Longtime listener who's become a friend. I texted him and a couple other guys that are on a text with us last night what had happened. And unbeknownst to me, Pete went and started a GoFundMe. I wasn't sure about that idea. I felt like, GoFundMe is usually for somebody who doesn't have health insurance or suffered some real terrible health tragedy or loss. Their home was destroyed in a fire or a natural disaster or something like that. But it's what Pete wanted to do. It's what he wanted to do. It's how he wanted to help. He felt the pain of the injustice, and he's a righteous dude, Pete Coe. Hates bullies. Hate when people hurt each other, discriminate against each other. I mean, he's just a great guy. So morally sound, in my opinion. And obviously someone who I hold close and care a lot about. And so he was trying to do a nice thing, and so I just didn't comment on it. Anyway, he went ahead and he started it, and then he shared it in our Discord platform. I guess this is what happened. And then my wife shared it on Facebook. I've been mixed on this, for the record. Ethically, and what does this do? How does this help my girl grow as a person? And frankly, if someone had a reaction and said, "That's horrible what happened to your daughter, but I hope she learns from it, and you shouldn't give her the money back yourself," and nobody else should either. If that was your reaction, I don't think you're a terrible person, and I don't necessarily think you're wrong. Most people don't have the money to make up for that. And even if you did, should you? Fair ethical question in this case as a parent, because what are you teaching your kid? So when Pete started to GoFundMe, I just wasn't sure, especially knowing that a lot of folks that are listeners and subscribers and have money and resources and are very generous with it would probably want to give that money. And I was just like, well, you're already paying me. And I don't know that my daughter should have this money replenished. And you can imagine that for me, it's It's a weird situation, but I kept thinking about it, and I talked about it with a few close friends and mentors of mine, and they all said the same thing. Same thing they said when I lost my job, and so many of you reached out and helped me in any number of ways then. Don't be too proud, and don't prevent people from helping you. It feels good to help other people. And Pete, when you want to help people, doesn't it make you feel good? Would you want them to stand in your way from helping them when you know that you could easily do something good? No. And that's how I try to live my life, too. And then I also thought, oh, my goodness, my daughter's 18 years old, and she doesn't know how the world works. Obviously, who does at that age? You can't teach your kids everything. You can't give them every experience. You can't point out every danger, and you sure as shit can't save them. That's what my dad had to tell me over and over again yesterday as I was weeping into the phone about this to him. Ugh, rough. But what she did learn yesterday is that, man, there are some evil, selfish, greedy criminals in the world. And then under a day later, she found out there are so many more amazing, loving, kind, generous people, many of which in this case are complete strangers to Ava, not to me or necessarily to my wife, because several of her clients and friends also made donations to this GoFundMe. So Pete Co starts this GoFundMe to raise $5,000 for Ava to replace what she had lost, which, I mean, you could look at it as $5,000 or 2 years of work. And he started it, I think, Tuesday morning. I think. We'll have to ask him. And by 10:30 on Tuesday night, we had reached $5,000. Yeah. Yeah. I know. It's crazy. Many of you are friends. Many of you I talk to regularly, and you didn't even know it happened, much less that there was a GoFundMe started. That's how quickly it got finished. So, and I don't know how you feel about it, and I'd love to know and hear from you about this. And I hope, again, that you'll join us at the Hangout to tell us. You can email me, and I'll try to share some of your reactions, standupwithpete@gmail.com. But to me, love wins. Kindness, generosity, being a good person, it wins. Light forces out darkness, all that. I believe it. And now I think hopefully my girls got to see that happen and believe it too. And by the way, if you heard the story and you said, man, I didn't know that happened, I would have given a couple bucks to your daughter, please dismiss that feeling. I still don't know how I feel about all this generosity and outpouring of money and love and thoughtfulness. And you didn't know about it, and it's over. So don't feel that at all in any way. Get rid of that feeling. It would make me uncomfortable. If you're like, man, I wish I knew. No. Whoever found out and how they found out, it wasn't something I was going to promote on my social media or on the podcast. But people found out in the Discord chat, and my wife shared it on her Facebook page. And next thing you know, it was fully funded. Literally, like in hours. So that is the story. There is a lesson there about what to tell your loved ones. And by the way, one more, I think, interesting, somewhat poignant thought is this kind of thing ends up happening. The people who end up being manipulated are often good people. They're very good people, meaning they don't think that someone would do this to them because they themselves would never do this to somebody else. The more of life you've seen, it doesn't mean you're a bad person, but potentially the less likely you are to fall for something like this, to be manipulated like this, because you realize these kinds of things happen. People do this. My daughter didn't know. Now she does. Now you do, in case you didn't. But most importantly, tell your teenage kids who have phones with numbers and you can look up their name and their number, and they say, are you Ava Dominic? Is this your number? Is this your address? Not hard to find. Okay, well, somebody has stolen your identity and committed a crime, and you're on the hook. That's the plot. Tell them about it. Tell everybody about it so we can prevent this from happening to someone you care about. Sit down with your kids. Tell them what happened to Ava Dominic. She'll be happy to tell them what happened. She'll join us at tonight's Hangout. She'll then do most likely an interview with me right here on the show to talk about this. Again, to all of those who did donate, I'll never be able to thank you. If, God forbid, your kid gets scammed, I'll be sure to donate to your GoFundMe. I hope you have a friend like Pete Co. And I guess the final thing I'll say about this is actually all lie. It didn't happen. Gotcha money, bitch! Out of here! Now, some people might have questions about, hey, even my brother had this question. Are you sure Ava's telling the truth? It's all documented. I got the receipts. I got the records. We reported it to the police just for, in my opinion, so that they could know that this is happening in our community and to other people. But there's just really no recourse. They're ghosts. And by the way, I didn't even mention this. You deposit the money in a Bitcoin account, which is even harder to take. I know. So there you have it. That's all I've got about that. I can't wait to talk to you and take your questions. And again, thank you so much. There is a lot of love, a lot of generosity, and so many good people in our world. And of course, in this community that we've created together. Can't do it without you. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you at tonight's Hangout 8 East. All right. It's now finally time to get to my guest on today's show. I had almost an hour conversation with the great Barry Ritholtz of Ritholtz Wealth Management, of the Big Picture blog, of the host of hit podcast and Bloomberg Radio's Masters in Business. Big Barry Ritholtz joins me today. We talked about the debt ceiling and what that means for your financial portfolio investment, the economy. We talked the politics around that. We talked inflation. We talked debt and deficit, tax and spend, and more. I should mention, I talked with Barry just before this happened to my daughter, and so he didn't know about it, and he did call me later, and we talked all about it. He was thoughtful and supportive, so just want to let you know that that hadn't happened yet. He is at Ritholtz on Twitter, the author of Bailout Nation, How Greed and Easy Money Corrupted Wall Street and Shook the World Economy. One of the smartest guys I know. We love when he joins us. Let's do it right now with Barry Ritholtz.
Barry Ritholtz. He's here today to talk to me about the coronation of the king. Thank you for joining us.
I see we're going to stay right in the center of my expertise. The monarchy. That's what I got my doctorate in. So my wife and I just started watching the Netflix show that is the prequel to Bridgerton. And there's this underlying subtext. No. But there's this underlying subtext throughout the show, which you can't help but notice, which is, from whence does the monarchy derive its authority, its legitimacy, its credibility?
Yeah.
And it's one thing 1,000 years ago where, hey, you have 50 guys with spears and armor. You're probably going to beat the town that doesn't have those guys. But, you know, in a modern world, it really is a vestige of a different era. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's kind of tough to take for most people, I think. I think most people, no matter where they are, politically or whatever, they're mostly against kings in the United Kingdom, much less anywhere else. Somebody shared a picture of him, you know, the king and Camilla, and in a serious tweet around it, said, you know, in their crowns and everything, and then wrote, they look so entitled. And I was like, yeah.
The King of England.
the most entitled, and they're wearing crowns. So I'm going to agree with you on that.
So on Twitter, people were during Saturday, during the coronation, someone was talking about how enthralled so much of the world is with the monarchy, and someone else said, except for the United States. And the pushback was, since when? And the winning answer was, pretty much since the Battle of Yorktown. I just thought that was genius. Cracked me up.
Have to kill a bee here. Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. A wasp or a bee?
That's definitely a wasp.
Yeah, we've been using chemical warfare on the mud wasps that keep coming back year after year.
A yellow jacket, as they call them.
Oh, they're annoying.
Motherfuck.
You know, it's a bee. If you open the door and ignore it, it'll leave you alone and fly out.
I'm in a shed doing an interview.
Yeah. No, you're not. You're in a shed doing battle with an insect.
Oh, I got it. Okay. My first question to you, for real, is about the debt ceiling. I was hiking with my friend, Dr. Zatz, as I do on Wednesday, and he's like, you know, I want to know what Ritholtz thinks, but I'm going to ask my guy, that manages my portfolio, how much I need to be concerned about the potential of default. So what are you telling your clients? What's your advice for folks about the potential that we could default? What does that mean for investors?
So let's unpack this because it's a little more complicated.
I mean, we've never been here, it would seem. Like there's no...
No, we've been here multiple times. Okay. And the difference between this go-round and previous go-rounds is what I call the disloyal opposition. In previous rounds, it was a game of brinksmanship. You know, stop and think about it. The Constitution puts the power of the purse in the hands of Congress, who says to the White House, here, we authorize you to go out and spend all of this money on these items and make it so. That's their left hand. And in their right hand, they said, but don't spend more than this. Well, which is it? You told me to spend $150 and then you gave me $148. What am I supposed to do with this? Am I supposed to not spend it? And then you go to the 14th Amendment, as Lawrence Tribe has written in an op-ed piece that says, you know, my thinking on this has evolved, and the whole purpose of the 14th Amendment is to prevent this sort of micromanaging and usurpation of executive branch authority and privilege and responsibilities by the legislative branch. So your job is to pass the budget. That's it. You passed the budget. You said, buy all this crap. Go buy it. The budget ceiling is in direct conflict with that. I love the idea of the president saying at the negotiations, hey, you know what? We think this is bullshit, and we're going to file a suit and take this all the way up to the Supreme Court so no one ever has to deal with this nonsense again. You passed the budget telling us to go spend this money. That's what we're doing. You can't. Now you're going to say, oh, we didn't win the Senate, so now we're going to throw a hissy fit. And so this comes back to the disloyal opposition. I think I've mentioned this on previous shows, but I'm at dinner with a whole bunch of people right after the financial crisis, like circa 2010, a couple of Nobel laureates, a couple of big hedge fund managers, a lot of intellectual horsepower in the room. And we are talking about the puny fiscal stimulus, to which my response was, well, that was a purposeful desire to cause a recession so that the opposing party can win the White House back in 2012. And everybody, oh, no. Listen, they're crazy, but they're not that crazy. No one would willfully, and that I've been watching this for decades, and it seems that it used to be that politics stopped at the water's edge and that we may have disagreed about how we're going to do things, but everybody wanted what was best for the country. And that is no longer true. And whether it's the gas tax being frozen since 1991 because of a harebrained idea that you shouldn't pay for services that the citizenry demands, the United States roads and bridges and tunnels are a disgrace compared to modern society. Elsewhere, Europe or elsewhere, it's now become a pure blood sport. It's just about power. It's not about anything else. Hey, here's an idea. Let's kill a few 100,000 people by stirring up an anti-vax movement because it'll hurt the opposition. That's the level where we are. Whenever anybody talks to me about vaccines, and why they're against them, I never know whether to decide. I have to figure out which bucket of idiocy do they go into. Are they just run-of-the-mill ordinary idiots, or have they been manipulated and they're receptive to that sort of idiocy? Yeah. And so, the desire to win power at any cost, whether it's treasure or lives, blood and treasure, it's really sad.
It's interesting.
That's where we are today.
It seems a little hypocritical for you to say that about the vaccine simply because you've announced your support for Robert Kennedy Jr. for president. Why are you supporting Robert Kennedy, Barry?
God, what a... First of all, the entire measles vaccine causes autism has been so thoroughly debunked. Yeah. Even to the point where the original publication was found to have false data. The Lancet, in one of their most public ever retractions, completely reversed that. And then the idiot who wrote it, the British doctor who wrote it, was kicked out of the medical procedure. They found that he willfully falsified data. The fact that Robert Kennedy believes this stuff, and anybody who believes what Robert Kennedy says, it's kind of sad. And it all comes back to the universe is inherently uncertain, the future is unknowable, and information is incomplete. And it's really important to be able to make intelligent decisions about an inherently unknowable future with incomplete or ambiguous or uncertain information.
Well done.
And, a lot of these people turn out to be really, really bad at it.
You've given me a political and the Lawrence Tribe argument, constitutional argument about why the whole debt ceiling thing is ridiculous. But the main, you didn't answer my question about, are your clients panicked about
nobody cares
debt
about
default?
this. It's nobody. So there's two reasons not
so
to
you're
care
not
about
then
this.
either. Obviously, that's the
Right.
answer is you're not.
So number one, historically, the debt ceiling always gets resolved. In fact, as a reminder, in the last administration, the debt ceiling was increased 3 times. So we know that this is just political maneuvering. It has nothing to do with the deficit. It has nothing to do with spending. Spending went up $7 trillion last administration. This is just, this is why people hate politics, because it's just the worst sort of nonsensical bullshit. Nobody really cares. Now, if you would ask me, what are the odds that this group of idiots is actually going to really screw up and do something bad, I think the odds are highest because it's a narrow majority. The Speaker of the House is kowtowing to the extremist fringe of his party, and they were very happy to burn it down. Burn it all down. Who cares? Just let that sort of stuff is very much in play. The question is, are there any adults left in D.C., in particular in the House Republicans? The Senate Republicans have plenty of adults in that group.
I don't know about
the House
that.
Republicans. It's kind of it's kind of a crapshoot.
I would definitely not say there's definitely not plenty of adults who are Senate Republicans.
There's more in the Senate than there are in the House.
On the issue of the debt ceiling, maybe so, but not. I wouldn't say that. Plenty.
You don't think there's more adult Republican members in the Senate as a proportion or actual numbers than there are in the House?
They're two different bodies, meaning you can be absolutely crazy because you only need primary voters in your district, your small district.
3,000 people. And
it's different when you represent the whole state. You can't 100%. Be as crazy, yet that does not prevent...
It's more Democratic as opposed to less Democratic.
It does not prevent the vast majority of Republican senators from being straight conspiracy theorists. So I don't think reasonable is a word to describe... conspiracy theorists.
So I'm still
on the issues of climate and vaccines to begin with. They're certainly not rational when it comes to guns. They're definitely not rational when it comes to immigration. I mean, name the issue, and I will tell you that most of them are not. What's the word you're using? Reasonable. But point is, most important point is that
makes me sad. That whole thing makes me sad. That
maybe my analysis
we become an ungovernable society, and you know what? As much as the monarchy is,
it's looking pretty good.
Anachronistic thing. No kidding aside, the parliamentary approach where you elect a majority and they govern, and when they lose the ability to govern, hey, you're out, and the next group comes in. Shit gets done.
Well, they don't have our issues with campaign finance and gerrymandered districts,
right?
Much less voting, suppression.
Right.
So I still feel like, just to be clear, debt ceiling, you're not worried, your investors aren't, and you're not worried that we're going to all lose our money. And yet you also think these people are the craziest people. So maybe we are.
So it's usually a 0% chance that the debt ceiling is going to be a problem. With this group of idiots, there's a 5% chance. It's not zero, but it's not 72%. I'm putting it at 5% because the damage is so substantial to the United States, to its citizens, to the economy, to the reputation of the U.S., to the ability to borrow money cheaply. All these things are being put at risk by a group that, is very anti-majority rule. And so, hey, we have this ability to use this as as a pain point, as a leverage over you, even though it was the smallest midterm election gain in the House that we've seen in 4 or 5 decades, and they didn't gain any seats. They didn't take over the Senate. So, I think it was Bush who said elections matter. Well, and this election matters. And the debt ceiling is an attempt to say, no, elections don't matter. Our little belief system and our grip for power, that matters. But elections don't
I like
matter.
that voice. So let me ask the question one final time a different way. If the debt ceiling, if we do default on our debt,
it'll be bad. It'll be bad.
What
for
will happen to my investment portfolio and yours and everybody else's?
It will temporarily go down. It'll be really ugly for a couple of days or weeks. A handful of people will go take advantage of that to make speculative bets. And when it's resolved, the market will come screaming back, assuming it doesn't go on for months or years. I can't imagine it goes on more than days or weeks. The irony of the last time this was an issue, when the S&P ratings agency lowered the creditworthiness of the United States for similar reasons, interest rates actually went lower. So it became cheaper for the United States to borrow, pointing out a truism that we all learned during the financial crisis, which is S&P and Moody's and the rating agencies are the most worthless group of ne'er-do-wells ever to darken. Yeah, they just are absolutely pointless, never align their ratings. They're shit. They're used to at one point in time be valuable. They sold themselves. They prostituted themselves. Now they're paid by the underwriters. That, at least in the run-up to the 08-09 crisis, it was the fact that their ratings had been bought and paid for and were no longer objective third-party situations, that instead of the bond buyers paying for it, it was actually paid for by the underwriters. That was, to me, that was the beginning of the end of the rating agencies as a viable, even though they're statutorily required to exist, it's kind of purposeless, and they could go away tomorrow. No one would be any worse.
Okay, let me ask you one more question related to the debt ceiling, which is the argument that Republicans are making is that they're fiscally conservative, and journalists buy this up. And
that's hilarious.
Nothing infuriates me more than some mainstream corporate congressional reporter saying Republicans are worried about spending, because of course they're not. It's always Democrats that take care of the fiscal responsibilities in the end.
So let's just ask the obvious question. How fiscally conservative were Republicans when they controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives under the first 2 years of Trump? And for, 4 of the years or 6 of the years under the second Bush? How'd they do?
No, they spent trillions in a war that they never paid for, and they gave out a new entitlement.
Choice.
They spent
unfunded tax cuts, unfunded prescription drug plan,
Part B, Medicare Part B. They didn't pay for any of that.
And I believe the number is 26% of the total U.S. debt was accumulated under President Trump.
Yeah.
So, and that was in one term, not 2 terms. We used to do something similar with Obama and Bush. Hey, X percent was under Obama and Y percent. I don't believe any president has accumulated either more raw dollars or more raw percentage debt than President Trump did. But with the full endorsement of the Republicans in the House and Senate. So now this goes back to the disloyal opposition. Hey, we know that when we pass a fiscal stimulus, it's good for the economy. People get jobs, people get raises, roads get paved, all sorts of good things happen. If anything, after wildly underfunding the fiscal stimulus during the financial crisis, you can make a pretty strong case that we overfunded it. 10% under Trump, the first CARES Act, 10%. $2 trillion, 10% of GDP, most ever. Second CARES Act, another $1 trillion under Trump. Third CARES Act under Biden, another $1 trillion. So it turns out the takeaway from the past few years has been fiscal stimulus works. John Maynard Keynes was right.
Yeah.
Art Laffer and all the other fools who said, no, you cut taxes and spending and the economy does better, turns out to be wrong. I mean, that is no longer a debate. People can say it, but it's just how they reveal that they're, clueless, data-free whack jobs.
So let's just take the argument on face value, the way that Republicans and right-wing commentators want to have it, and let's address it, because the basic argument is this debt ceiling issue is that Republicans are going to use the debt ceiling as a form of leverage to cut spending that they have always wanted to cut. And because the debt is such a problem for America, and we could talk about whether or not that's true, but that's their argument, that debt is bad for the economy, that it's bad for the dollar, that it's bad for America. Okay, let's say that's true. That's been conventional wisdom for years. It's
been wrong for my entire adult life.
Well, right. But if the concern is the economy, and if the concern is Americans' own investment portfolios, their own jobs, then the far bigger concern than future debt would be a default. The damage a default would do immediately.
It would make it more expensive to borrow to pay the debt. The debt would get bigger automatically. Hey, if you want to make the debt worse, default on the U.S. obligation. So our cost of borrowing in the future is higher. But you have to be aware of the framework and the structure of questions that people tee up. Here's the reality. For as long as I can remember, certainly since the 1980s, all I've heard, since the 70s, all I've heard for the past half century has been, here's what's going to happen if we allow our debt to continue to grow. Nobody's going to lend to the United States government anymore, so interest rates are going to spike higher. No one's going to want U.S. dollars, so the value of the dollar is going to collapse relative to our other currencies. No one is going to want to do business with the United States, so our corporate entities are going to be at a disadvantage. On and on goes the arguments, and they've never come true. A few months ago, the dollar reached all-time highs against other currencies. It's since backed off, but it's still absolutely amongst the strongest currencies in the world, up until the most recent bout of Fed rate hiking cycle to fight inflation, caused in part by all that fiscal stimulus during the pandemic. We've had the lowest rates that we've ever seen in the history of the United States. And still, people are very happy to lend money by the trillion to the U.S. government at 3.5%, 4%. You go out and you buy 10-year Treasury bonds at 3.87%. Those are historically very low rates. Are they low as they were 2 years ago? No. Are they lower than most of the past century? Yes. So it's easy for us to finance our debt. That's how you know the whole argument has just been nonsense. Everything the deficit hawks have warned about turns out to be total bullshit. And every time the deficit hawks are in power, or at least feel they have a lever of power to pull, they never fund any of their spending or their tax cuts. Hey, listen, I would love to pay less taxes, but if you're going to pay less taxes, you have to either A, come up with more revenue somewhere else, like in Nassau County, letting weed shops be legal, or B, come up with some offset of spending. And you look at, 2/3, 3/4 of the budget, defense, Social Security, Medicaid. What's left over, the discretionary spending is so tiny, a 5, a 10, a 15% cut across the board. It's meaningless. It's just a hollow gesture. And this is deficit as kabuki theater. It's not really an honest debate about this.
The most succinct way to put it is, if your concern is about long-term federal national debt, then you must understand a debt ceiling default would make that debt far, far worse.
It probably would make it worse. We don't know exactly what happens after the fact. Maybe people react worse or better, but it would probably make it worse. look, if you're really concerned about the debt, you set up a blue ribbon commission and you come up with ways to why. So we could look at Medicaid, we could look at Social Security, we could look at the military. Why does the military have bases around the world that they don't need? Why do they have bases in the United States? How come every time we build a project, a little piece of that project has to go to every goddamn congressional district to get them to sign off on it? We could build stuff for half of what it costs. Why are we still using equipment that the military says they don't need? Why are we still buying equipment that we don't need? Because it creates jobs in certain congressional districts. So that's the military. Why is Medicaid, the largest purchaser of prescription drugs, not allowed to negotiate, although that rule just kind of semi-changed? Why aren't we negotiating for cheaper drug prices?
You mean Medicare, I think. But
Medicare. I never can keep them straight. What, that was the Bush pass. It was a giant sop to the prescription drug industry. Wait, the biggest purchaser in the world has no negotiating ability? It's just
the
so
Veterans
Department
can. And I'm guessing Medicaid would probably be second. But that's such an important point to always make.
And then Social Security, you can come up with little tweaks to Social Security that makes it solvent for longer, starting with there's a cap.
Raising the cap.
Right. Yeah, there's a cap. I don't remember where it is, but it was shockingly low.
Like 107.
I mean, come on. So Bill Gates is done paying Social Security on January 1st? Get the fuck out of here. It's just so
January
stupid.
1st at 12
8 a.m. Right, on a hourly basis. So if you're serious about this shit, if you think it's important, I don't really think deficits are important. You look at Japan, their debt to GDP ratio is like triple ours. So everybody want 100% debt to GDP. They're like 240 or something crazy. Suffering with no ill effects. They borrow money for next to nothing, and the yen still is one of the major currencies in the world. So all that said, if you're serious about it, then go out and put together a bipartisan panel of giant waste of time and paper clips, and look at the three biggest expenditures the government has and come up with a whole laundry list of suggestions as to what to do. And then good luck getting, Congress to pass that. That would be really valuable if you did that. This is all about grandstanding. This is all about appeasing the base. When the Speaker of the House is a puppet to one of the most reprehensible Congress critters there are, because he needs her in order to maintain his power, you can't take anything they say very seriously. It's a shit show, a dumpster fire. Good luck with that.
One of my favorite early conversations to talk about with you, when we first started talking years ago, was about like the Peter Schiffs of the world and the Ron Paulites and the Goldbugs. And they've only gotten more popular because of the internet, and anybody can go on and give investment advice or anybody can go on and scare the shit out of you in those pre-roll ads. You hear all those types of, preppers and gold bugs. Right now I'm hearing concern from the right. Fox News has this article from, a Breitbart economics expert issues dire warning on serious threat facing the U.S. dollar. It's inevitable, says Jon Carney. Now, my thing is this, and then I'll shut up.
By the way, let me just clarify. Everybody should send all of their useless dollars to me for proper disposal. I will take care of them and make sure that they are.
That is very thoughtful of you.
And I will make sure that they are disposed of properly. And so they're worthless. Hey, it's funny that all these people that are advertising this stuff, they get paid in dollars, right? Like when they advertise, it ain't 47 drachma. They're looking for $99 to join now. And if you subscribe now, you'll get our special extra. By the way, gold has done really well the past 2 years. It's rallied up to over $2,000. Not the worst trend it's seen in its history, especially as crypto came in.
But also, not only send all of your dollars to Ritholtz, you said last time, send all of your unused Cologuard rectal screening boxes. You want those too, right? Still, or I don't know what you're doing with those. Some kind of crafting.
I think there's some. I think that $2,001, by the way, as we speak.
Is that right? Moment. My question though is not about the dollar, because I don't believe these scare tactics. My question is, how should people critically think about the big firms like Merrill and anyone else down to you and any other investment portfolio who have, a whole bunch of data and credibility in billions of dollars of investors versus these individual types, YouTube types that are constantly warning about the economy and all these other things. They always get it wrong. Like how should we critically think about who to trust when it comes to economic analysis or predictions, financial predictions on the dollar or anything else?
Crisis sells, yellow journalism sells, the sort of Armageddon forecasts attracts a certain type of person that is receptive to it. It's a persuasive form of marketing, because if someone says, "Hey, things are going to meander along a little better, a little worse over the rest of your lifespan, and this might happen and that might happen, and some things will be pretty good and some things will be not so good, and maybe there'll be some opportunities along the way," that doesn't catch your attention as the world is coming to an end, and here's how to position your portfolio to take advantage of it. That's a very different marketing technique. And as we've seen on the social media channels like Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere, the algorithm rewards extremism. The algorithm rewards aggressive, jump up and down, clickbait sort of crap. Quiet contemplation is not rewarded by Twitter's algorithm.
But your credibility with me and with others definitely lies in the phrase, "I don't know." Calm down. We don't know anything yet. You have a recent post over at Ritholtz. Nobody knows anything. FedWatch edition. You gave me a similar unsatisfying yet credible answer about the bank in California, Silicon Valley Bank. You're like, we don't know yet. You're saying it rewards, and I agree with you, obviously, and those people are going to get more clicks than you. But within the people whose respect you want, you have a lot of credibility because often we don't know anything. So you're not giving people the answer they want. You're giving the answer that you know is most responsible at this juncture.
Yeah, when Silicon Valley Bank blew up. So the warning I had made beforehand was, hey, the Fed is raising rates too quickly and something's going to break. I wasn't, full disclosure, I wasn't saying, and it'll be Silicon Valley Bank this weekend, but that was the dumb luck of it. Most of the time, the best thing for most people to do is nothing, which is a deeply unsatisfying thing. Right. It's when you say to somebody, don't just do something, sit there. No, I got to do something, because that, your brain is telling you danger, so you have to react. Otherwise, there's trouble. But listen, this is the difference between the feedback loop in markets and the feedback loop in politics. You could be wrong politically, no matter where you are in the system. You could be running for president. You could be a voter. Hey, if you're a voter and you vote for somebody who's going to slash your Social Security and Medicaid, and you need to rely on that in your retirement age in order to live and eat and be comfortable, the feedback loop on electing the wrong guy is 20, 30 years. If you go into the stock market and you think you have an idea about why this company is going to do well and that company is going to do bad, you find out in a matter of days, hours, minutes even, that you're wrong. You find out really, really quickly. And that's the difference. That feedback loop is that's what makes finance so fascinating is, say whatever you want. And if you make money doing it, if your assessment of an ambiguous world identifies an opportunity through your own intellect and ability to suss out what's really happening, well, you'll be rewarded for that. But when some of the people you mentioned, the Ron Pauls, I know he doesn't run a portfolio. He writes books and whatever he's doing now, he's kind of fallen from the public view, other than the backs of conservative magazine selling something or other. And when we look at some of the other people, Peter Schiff used Armageddon to preach a lot of marketing, and ironically, he got the financial crisis right, more or less, but rolled out of the U.S. and into Europe, which fell further and stayed down longer and didn't recover as much as the U.S. did. So even when you get the big picture correct, and I'm not saying he totally got it correct, but he was more right than wrong, how that expressed itself in a portfolio turned out to be totally wrong. And so the clicks attracted the viewers, but he wasn't able to turn it into anything sustainable or lasting.
I mean, he's still out there. Peter Schiff's dad is in jail, though, wasn't he, for not paying taxes?
I don't remember. And Peter Schiff, I don't know if it's because I just am watching less TV. I just haven't seen him around. The U.S., and here's Peter Schiff 4 hours ago. The U.S. is in a financial crisis worse than 2008. All right. So this is on Fox News. So here's an entity that, is all about, the other guy's in charge. Therefore, it's a worse situation than anything we've ever had. Economist Peter Schiff warns death blow coming for the U.S. dollar, U.S. to lose its reserve currency status. And once again, I have to remind people, I will properly dispose of all of your worthless dollars. Send it here. So, I mean, this is the sort of thing that people have talked about for years and years and years. And, the problem with broken clocks is that they're right, every 12 hours. They're right twice a day. So if you make the same forecast over and over and over again over the course of decades, hey, maybe one day you'll be right. But it's completely useless to people who had to live during the prior 20, 30, 40 years. It was just meaningless.
I want to ask you about your thoughts on inflation and the Fed. You've been obviously paying attention to that. We also just got another pretty impressive job report. I mean, it just seems to be continuing. Robust new jobs. What
253,000 new jobs, which was probably 20%. But by the way, so before I get to the inflation number, let's just talk about the non-farm payroll number, which is I find to be the most annoying economic data point of every month. And people why are you don't like this model? Well, and here's what everybody forgets. We get so focused on is it 260,000? Is it 247,000? All right. So the U.S. labor market, the number of people working is about 154 million people. 154 million people get up every day and they eat breakfast and shower and they go to work, even if it's going upstairs to a spare bedroom and that's their office. But there are well over 150 million people that go to work every day. Of those, that 153.7 million people, in any given month, somewhere between 2 and 2.2 million will leave their job. Now, they might be leaving because they're retiring, they died, they're switching jobs, they're taking a sabbatical, they're leaving their work. And in the same month, about 2.3 million people will start a new job. Either they're graduating college or they're coming back from maternity leave or they're switching positions. The net difference between the 2 million job leavers and the 2 million job starters out of 155 million, that 250,000 people, that's the number everybody gets all excited about. It's, it's a fraction of 1%. It's such a tiny number. The only thing that matters is the overall trend. Hey, month after month, are we more or less creating more jobs than we're losing, or are we losing more jobs? And you'll go 2, 3, 4 years of numbers that'll bounce around between plus 100 and plus 500, and that's fine until it finally rolls over and you start to get a bunch of negative numbers in a row. But every month, this obsession with, is it 253? Is it 247? it's 250,000 people out of 155 million. It's such an insignificant number. We just want to know, are we creating more jobs? Are paychecks rising at a rational rate or not? So that's non-farm payroll. Hold that aside. By the way, every one of these economic data points comes with some hair on it like that. The CPI data, the inflation data, it pretty much has shown us in the real world, when you look at the components that go into it, most of the goods that we purchase have stopped going up as of a year ago, last June, or they're going up much more slowly. So at the worst of it, they were going up 9, 10, 11%. Now, most of them, not only have they stopped going up, many of these things have come back to where they were pre-pandemic. Lumber, cheaper than it was before the pandemic. Shipping containers, about the same price. The cost of shipping, pretty close to where it was. And oil broke $70. It's $67. Gasoline today is the same price it was in 2009. So you have to take inflation with a big piece of salt, because it's just not accurate to look at the CPI data and say that's telling me exactly what's going on in inflation. By the way, the services side is still very elevated, and the biggest component of services CPI is owner's equivalent rent. It's how we figure out the cost of housing. Right, if you could rent your house, what would you get for it?
Right.
And you know what turns out to be the biggest driver of owner's equivalent rent? Mortgage rates. And you know what's the biggest driver of mortgage rates? The Fed inflation rates. So in the perversity of modern times, the reason inflation has remained sticky and CPI is high is because the Fed has driven rates so high and driven mortgages so high that apartment prices are elevated.
But
if you want lower rates, lower inflation, you have to take mortgage rates lower and inflation. That's how you fight inflation. It's very, very counterintuitive.
Yeah, but that's not intentional. The mortgage, the interest rates are going up not as a result to raise, about housing. Isn't it due to other inflationary pressures? Like it's not they're not raising.
A year ago, yes. Today, not as much. I mean, we've underbuilt single family homes for the better part of a decade following the 08-09
It's an inventory
crisis.
thing.
So in part. So think about this. You overbuilt homes in the 2000s by a modest amount. You switched to multifamily homes and apartments, and the luxury apartments are the most profitable. So it's skewed towards the upper end of the income scale, and which makes sense. You incentivize people to. You can only build so much on the square of land. So you're going to want to put the most expensive possible units you can sell on that square of land. That's just how the incentives and the legislation is set up. But part of the housing circumstance is a shortfall. When we talk about inflation, we have a shortfall of houses because we've underbuilt them for decades. You have a problem with NIMBY and mixed use, and there's a ton of reasons why we don't have enough housing. Why are wages going up? Because we have a shortfall of legal immigrants. I don't mean illegals. I mean legal immigrants. That number has been falling for decades, and we need to adjust that. There's no adults in the room on that topic.
Well, that's for sure.
You have a huge number of people who have opted out of the labor force, either early retirement or disability because they can. You lost the official numbers are 2-point-something million people to COVID, of which 500,000 or so were working. Maybe it's worse. And then when you look at things like long COVID, you have anywhere between 10 and 20 million people who are out because they're suffering from long COVID and are not participating in the labor force. If we could get another 5 million workers in the United States, wages would stabilize. Lots of these jobs would be filled. And the economy would continue going back towards a more normalized inflation setting. And as is, we're heading back to normal inflation. We still have a shortage of semiconductors, which is why new car prices are so high and unavailable. And it's why used car prices remain elevated. They're down off their peaks, but they're still higher than they should be, and then will be for another year or two, because for 2 years we didn't make enough. We didn't make enough cars.
Well, don't get me started on the car market. Well, maybe you should. I really want to talk about that with you, but
well, who told you to buy a Chevy Bolt? I mean, what the hell is
Chevy
that
Bolt.
About? Oh, that's much better.
No, it's not. But both the Bolt and the Volt have been discontinued.
That's a shame. By the way, the GMC Hummer is getting great reviews. So the new version, and my wife's car is a hybrid, and I think I put gas in it 3 times in the past 6 months.
So much to talk about with EVs. It's happening. It would seem fast, kind of, in a way.
Very fast.
I saw.
Fast.
Did you see this article yesterday? The UAW is holding their endorsement of Biden. And I was like, I wonder why. And it was for the reason they were that UAW is concerned is that it takes fewer people to assemble an EV.
Yeah.
And the argument, of course, is well, I forget what the argument was about that, but the UAW is hesitant because the EVs require fewer laborers, and so it's like, well, what is the alternative? There is no alternative. I mean, the future is guaranteed EV. They're not going backward on engine design.
That's right. That's exactly right. So listen, the UAW only swings so much weight. You know, what are they going to do? Maybe Michigan. They can affect Michigan. But in the meanwhile, this is a multi-decade process to transition, and this administration has poured billions of dollars into the auto industry. The UAW should be grateful because this was going to happen anyway. Don't you want it to happen here instead of happening in, Europe and Japan, and we just import Chinese EVs? Like, get on board, because this is a global competition. And if you say no EVs, we don't want to see subsidies for EVs in the United States. Well, how many UAW workers are going to build these Chinese EVs?
Right.
0. It's. I understand they have to make the argument for today, but it just seems a little short-sighted.
Right. So what else did I want to ask you about? What else? I mean, maybe you had a couple things you want to mention, but I was interested in the post that you had on your very popular blog about minimum wage.
Last week. Yeah, that was a really interesting study.
Want more jobs? Raise the minimum wage.
I mean, we've known this for forever, but let me explain it in a way that, this goes back to Alan Kruger and the famous study he published with his colleague, whose name Card. I think his colleague's name was Card. And they had these 2 adjacent towns that one was in Pennsylvania, one was in New Jersey. I'm sure I'm getting some of this wrong. But they regionally were part of the same region, but the tax code and the legislation one was New Jersey, one was Pennsylvania. And so more or less in the same area with this state line running down the middle of it, one half got a minimum wage increase and the other half didn't. And you would, because of the different state laws. And surprisingly, the half with the increase saw more jobs created than the other half. There's a pretty straightforward explanation for why this is. And by the way, there have been tons of studies and subsequent, this is like 40 years old, 30 years old, but there have been hundreds of studies since, and the vast majority, 90+% of them demonstrate the same thing, that moderate increases in minimum wage over time doesn't destroy jobs, it creates jobs. And if you stop and think about it, it makes perfect sense. Who pays minimum wage? Well, it tends to be low-end retailers like Walmart or dollar stores or companies like that, or McDonald's and franchisees and things like that. And so if there's a rule that says you have to pay $12 versus $9, and the $12 goes to the minimum wage worker, in the alternative, it's $9, well, where does the extra $3 per worker per hour go? It mostly ends up as profits in the hands of the owner, be it the shareholders of Walmart or the franchisee of the McDonald's. I have other complaints about McDonald's and Walmart than this, which we can go into detail at some other time.
Yeah,
but here's just the math. If you give an extra $3 an hour to a minimum wage worker, they're going to just foolishly, frivolously fritter that money away on things like food and medicine and clothes and housing. And most of that is local. They spend their income locally. But if the money ends up in the hands of Walmart, well, then it goes to the shareholders, which are spread throughout the country. Or if it's the local franchisee, typically franchisees, they're doing pretty well. They're upper income. They already have all their, core purchases taken care of. The house, the car, the clothes, the medicine, the this, the that. And so if they make more money, maybe it gets invested into some new project. Maybe it gets put into the 401k or the stock market. But it tends to not be spent locally the way, if it's one owner picking up an extra $100,000 or 50 workers collectively, picking up an extra $2,000 each, the 50 workers are going to spread that money locally.
Right.
Because when you're minimum wage, every penny you get, you're not rolling that into your 401k. You don't have a 401k.
Right, you don't have one.
This is sustenance. This is survival. So it tends to, and now that $100,000 getting spent locally will stimulate the economy and lead to more hiring in retail and food service, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the explanation for why it works. This is just another recent giant study that was done by, let me pull up the name.
I think it's important to mention, if you're arguing or thinking about minimum wage, it's easy to cherry pick a situation where maybe there was a detrimental effect on jobs if it was raised too high or something. I can't think of that, but that's what people like to do. And I think that we have to have rational conversations about what we're talking about. No one's saying raise the minimum wage to a number that would be detrimental to most businesses or the economy. We're talking about tagging it to the consumer. What is it? The number cost of living.
Right.
No,
it hasn't been. It goes up as Congress authorizes. And, that was Claudia Sahm, a Fed researcher's suggestion, is we should tie the minimum wage to inflation and it should automatically reset when you have a big spate of inflation, because the people who are the lowest earners feel the impact of inflation the most. So the pushback is, well, that would be inflationary, wouldn't it? No, inflation is when there's too many dollars chasing too few goods, not people buying medicine and food. I think there's enough food around. And I think if you want Advil, if you have the money, you could go buy it. It's the, the automobiles are a perfect example. We buy 16 million automobiles a year, but there's only enough chips for 14 million. Well, prices are going to go up because there's demand exceeds supply. Food and housing and clothes, stuff like that, doesn't tend to get driven higher because we're paying people $12 or $14 an hour versus $8, $9, $10 an hour.
All right. What else? Anything else? We're good. That's it. That's all.
I don't know,
I've got.
That's 52 minutes of empty-headed blather.
I disagree.
You really want more? How much more?
I disagree, and so
take?
Does everybody listening.
What else can I tell you? I've had a couple of really interesting guests on the podcast over the past few months.
Masters in Business, go subscribe and search for it wherever you get your podcasts, if you haven't already.
It's really, if you're interested in finance, the economy, markets, investing. I just had the chief investment officer of Goldman Sachs on. This weekend. I have coming up a friend who was the first first investor into Robinhood. That worked out pretty okay for him. Just really if I'm good at anything, it's finding these really fascinating people and just, asking reasonable questions to get them. I always want to know, hey, who the hell are you and how did you get that way? And what can the rest of us learn from you? And so that's what drives the interviews I do. I call it the most fun I have all week, and it's really true.
Love it. Go listen, and I hope everybody else will as well. I appreciate you very much, your time. Thank you, sir, and we'll get back to the Kings. I'll let you get back to watching the Coronation. Is that over, by the way? I think it's over. I think they're finished. I don't know.
I think he is now officially the king.
Yeah.
By the way, let me tell you the name of that show. If you liked Bridgerton, right? And I know a lot of people did like Bridgerton because it was one of Netflix's most... Queen Charlotte is the name of the new show.
If you like
it's very much worth checking out.
That is your recommendation.
If for no other reason, the design, set design and the costumes, they're amazing.
You watched Succession?
I watched the first episode because so many people told me they loved it. And there wasn't a single character that I gave the slightest shit about.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I watched it and I'm like, I don't like any of these people. So I think we saw 2 or 3 episodes total. And I'm like, why do I want to spend an hour a day with a bunch of assholes I don't care for? And so I never got into it. I know people there's a bunch of shows like that I'm like, I watched the first season of Breaking Bad.
Yeah, I never watched Breaking Bad either.
I watched the whole first season. I'm like, all right, that was okay. I'm good. Thanks. I'm good. No, you don't understand. It's the greatest show ever. I've said this and people don't understand it. I don't always want to immerse myself in just like violence and gore and negativity. And, listen, I enjoy a good thriller. I love a great cartoon violence. Marvel stuff blows up. But just watching people be miserable and in pain, I don't find that especially uplifting or entertaining.
Same.
In anticipation of Guardians of the Galaxy 3, my wife and I just rewatched the first 2.
Oh.
The first one is so good and was so underrated. It just kind of snuck in and nobody had any idea how great it was.
Abe and I are planning tonight to go. We'll see.
That's what we're talking about tonight.
I'll see you there.
No,
I won't talk to you, though. I won't say hi.
Right. We just nod as you walk by.
Yeah, I don't acknowledge people in the theater.
Like, Sup.
Ritholtz, thank you. I'm ending it now.
55555. You could stop it right there.
All right, there he goes. Ritholtz, Barry Ritholtz. Go check him out at Masters in Business right now. His blog is so good. And if you want, I guess you can go become his client, Ritholtz Wealth Management. One more thing I want to share with you. I have, there's so many amazing people creating so many great things here on the show, including at least a few of you that have your own podcasts. Of course, we've talked to Maddie Carlson about What Am I Making? My friend Zach Lewis has a great podcast called The Soccer Dad Pod. And of course, Dr. Barry Hummel and his daughter Abigail co-host Pops on Hops, where this week they have Frances Walton making her long-awaited appearance. Frances, longtime listener, subscriber, supporter, friend of mine, member of The Hue here on Stand Up. Well, she submitted a self-titled debut album by Mute Math to the virtual jukebox that Abigail and Barry have and joined them as a guest to talk about it. And apparently that the record label wanted to market this album as a Christian rock band, a designation that the band fought to avoid. However, some of those Christian themes do pop up in the album, which led to several interesting discussions about the episode, including this conversation about their song Chaos. Barry says the stand-up community has always been supportive of their little vanity project. Getting to know these people from around the country has been a delightful surprise for him. Never would have predicted 4 years ago. Thank you, Barry. Here it is. Frances Walton, Pops on Hops. Go subscribe and listen to the episode yourself when it comes out this Friday.
You stay true when my world is lost. Everything around's breaking down my chaos. I always see you when my sight is lost. Everything around's breaking down. Chaos. Chaos. I know you stay true. Yeah, I know you stay. Yeah.
This is the other one. It's in my top 5, but it's not one of my top 3 favorites. I'm listening to that with a different ear now as we played it based on what you just said, Francis, about Katrina. Again, it's a song about, the world is filled with chaos. It seems like his partner is the one anchor in his life, but I didn't have any context for what the chaos might be. Knowing about New Orleans and maybe a connection to Katrina makes the chaos seem more real to me. Again, I was thinking of these things in terms of just emotional buy-in, like life is chaotic and you're my rock. That was sort of the 1-2 punch. The other thing I will say is you're going to notice I cut a lot of these clips deep in the song. 2 reasons for that. One is because it is a very instrumental album, sometimes the intros are incredibly long on these songs to get to the first lyrics. So you can't really start from the beginning, which is too bad because you miss one of the powers of the album, which is the instrumentation. But the second thing is his second verses seem to be the stronger verses. And we've talked about this with some other bands, Abigail, where the first verse sets the table and the second verse gets to the meat of the issue. And I found this song to be like that too. I thought the second verse was the stronger of the 2 verses in here and got to the crux of the emotional issue more efficiently. So when I was trying to debate my top 3, this was in the mix.
This is my 3rd favorite song on the album. So yeah, exactly like I said, we're getting all of my favorites out of the way early. I was fascinated by this song when I first put the album in, and I honestly thought this was going to end up in my first favorite spot. Other things shifting around and becoming more my favorites is the reason why this is only my 3rd favorite. But this was a real hook for me in the album early in my listening to it. I find it interesting. It's most obvious in this song, but it does appear in other songs throughout the album. It seems like the rhythm and the vocals is off slightly. But I don't mind that. I think it's interesting. It gives my brain something to focus on. It keeps me engaged. And so I don't mind that at all. It's just a little quirk about this album, this band maybe that I've noticed. But yeah, I utterly love this song. And I find the opening line really funny. Complications, my claim to fame.
I think a lot of the drumming is syncopated.
Yeah.
He'll hit something offbeat or he'll do something a little different throughout. And because it is the backbone of all the songs, it's really interesting to try to follow that. In a song like Chaos, lining the vocals up out of sequence a little bit with the percussion and the rhythm section just adds to the level of chaos, right? I mean, it makes you more uncomfortable in a song that's about chaos.
Yeah, this is actually my 2nd favorite song.
Nice.
Yeah, the way it starts, it kicks off that drum hit, and then you kick into the actual song. It just gets me hype. This, too, I can see the spiritual aspect because, again, you have the pleading and they're talking about while I still breathe, while I'm here kind of on this plane, I'm screaming out, you have to give me hope because I don't know what kind of hope you're going to get from another person, especially when he's saying like my sight is lost. I need something else. And then like, you're the only truth. When the world is false, and that's that big T truth, which could be a spiritual entity, the universe or something like that. But you could also take it back and be secular with it and say it's another person because some of these songs, I can't get a spiritual feel from it. But you can have both worlds. I'm sure both can be true. But then also when you get into that syncopated aspect you were talking about, I like the song Take 5 and Take Another 5 where it's like 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And it's kind of off like that. And this gives me that feel that I like the weirdness of the beat in this. So I'm comfortable in this chaos.
I think your point about the writing being vague allows it to be subject to interpretation, right? You can come at it with a secular eye, you can come at it with a spiritual eye and get 2 different things out of that. Because again, looking back on it, you're right. Who is he turning to for that support? Who is his anchor?
Right.
In my mind, I defined it as a partner, and in your mind, you defined it as a spiritual entity of some sort. And I think if you used words like save me, I mean, there are certain words that you could use that would lend itself more to a religious interpretation or spiritual interpretation. And he doesn't use a lot of those words, which makes it, to me, better because it doesn't steer you in a direction. It allows anybody who's listening to it to bring their own experience to it and interpret it in their own way and make it meaningful for them. And so that's great songwriting because it makes it accessible for anybody, regardless of their religious background.
Yeah, I want them to be successful.
Right.
So I'm like, make sure you can get the most out of what you're putting out there. And so if you do say that you're Christian rock, people will just pass you off because they don't want to hear that. So respect to them. However, they're writing these lyrics. I get what I get out of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the reason why it's so open to interpretation is because a lot of Christians, their religion focuses on them having this personal relationship with God. And so you can interpret some of these lyrics as a personal relationship, right? Whether that is with your God or with another person on earth, it still rings true no matter which way you're going to read it.
But I don't think about that much. So I do have to have that pointed out to me sometimes.
You heathen, you.
Yeah, it's calibration. You're not calibrated for it. That's all good.
I'm a fallen angel, so I attended Catholic school for 12 years, including 4 years of high school with Augustinian monks.
Ooh.
But I have, as they say, left the flock. So I don't think in terms of those things, even though I've had that experience and had a lot of religious education over my lifetime. That's how far I've fallen. I mean, I fell hard and deep. Right off the cliff, baby.
Oh, no.
Oh, man. So now that we know all my personal foibles, let's move on to track 5.
All right, there you go. Dr. Barry Hummel, his daughter Abigail Hummel, and our friend France Francis Walton. That was good. I like it. Religion, music, honesty, different takes and interpretations, big words. Good stuff, guys. Loved it. Go subscribe to Pops on Hops wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, that's it. That's all I've got for you. I hope to see you at tonight's hangout. I love you guys. Today's quote of the day comes from the great James Baldwin, who once said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed. Nothing can be changed till it is faced." Thanks, James Baldwin. Talk to you tomorrow. Maybe tonight.